Hi, my name is Ernest, and if you are preparing for the CLF CO2 examination, that is the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner Exam, you're in the right place, and I want to say welcome. We're going to go through some of the AWS services that you should know for this exam. Of course, this is a foundational exam, and so you don't need to go in depth, but there will be some services that you will need to go in depth in, and we will get to that point, and I will explain to you what you need to know at that level. First off, let's talk a little bit about what you'll be tested on. In this exam, there are four domains: the cloud concepts, cloud technology and services, security and compliance, billing, pricing, and support. And of these four, the cloud technology and services is 34% of the scored content. And that means you should expect between 30 to 36 of the 65 questions, basically testing how many services do you know? Do you know what they are and what they do? And so we're going to focus our attention on a series of videos in this series that we're starting now to address those services. One of the color codes that you should pay attention to is this yellow, pale yellow, and white. And what does this mean? So if you see any of the services highlighted with a yellow color, that means there is some depth beyond what we'll talk about in this video. So you have to do some more research and try to learn more about that service because there will be more questions asked about how that service operates beyond the surface. And then the high yield just means you're going to see a lot of these as either distractions or just concepts you need to understand. And maybe you need to know one more sentence about these services. And so you want to pay attention to those. But the white are like general surface knowledge services. Basically, these would be questions like, on the surface, like what is a um, graphical database? That's a very straightforward thing to know. So we're going to go into the first domain, which is compute, and I'm going to go through them one after the other, just give you some keywords to look out for in questions. And also going to try to address some of the possible example questions you would see and how you need to give an answer to those questions. So let's start with compute. In the compute domain, we have quite a number. So we have Amazon EC2, which is a big service in AWS. We have AWS Batch, we have Lightsail, we have Elastic Beanstalk. Then we have, local zones, Outpost, and Wavelength. And we're going to talk about each of them. But let's start with EC2. You don't really need to know. In this video, we're not going to go into so much detail about EC2. I want you to go check other videos and really get to understand how EC2 works. But at the core and at the surface, um, EC2 is a virtual server in the cloud. That's all you really need to know from a high level, but there's a lot more to dive into. So a virtual server just means like basically CPU and GPU in the cloud. But there's some features you have to know about this. So when you see things like auto scaling, which is the idea of expanding, adding, or removing compute capacity to meet the demands and the changing demands, then you want to pay attention to EC2 as a service for auto scaling. And that's a feature in EC2. Um, Inspector is one of those services that is more in the security domain, which we'll get to in another part of this video. But it's a vulnerability management service that will discover some vulnerabilities in your EC2 instances, right? It also works with ECR images and with Lambda functions, but primarily you're going to see questions where it says, which service would you use to find vulnerabilities in EC2? And the answer would be Inspector, okay? Amazon Inspector. Then we have elastic load balancing. And basically, elastic load balancing is um, a feature that we use to achieve fault tolerance. Basically, if you have one EC2 instance that is receiving traffic, we might want to deviate traffic to other instances to handle traffic. And so that's where you would use Elastic Load Balancer. Okay. Then Compute Optimizer basically is just one of the features where it's a service that identifies and recommends compute resources, optimal compute resources. Image Builder is going to help you build and maintain secure Linux or Windows Server images. That's all you need to know about that. But like I said, you have to go in depth and understand how EC2 works, especially with the networking aspect of it. But another thing to know that you'll be asked questions on is EC2 pricing. And so we have on demand, which is what you use for flexible use cases. You just want to be able to spin up an EC2 instance and run your workloads. That's what you would go with, especially if you don't want to lose your. It's not the data you're working with is not. It's not something you want to lose, right? Um, but Spot is the opposite, right? You're open to losing your data. You are open to flexible use of the EC2 instance when it's not required that you keep everything running consistently. It's extremely cheap, by the way. So Spot is the option in that case. There are savings plans which you can save a lot of money. With Spot pricing, for example, you can save up to 90% of pricing. Savings plans can go up to 70 something percent. Okay. Reserved instances is what you want to do, like from one year to 3 years. You can reserve some instances for use so that there's no downtime at all. And then dedicated host and instance options are, with dedicated host, you're saying I want to have this physical infrastructure in the cloud dedicated to just me. You don't want any other one to use the tenancy feature of EC2, where you have other people using the same hardware in the cloud. You can have your own host. And why would you use this option? Well, there are licensing requirements, compliance requirements. Uh, that's when you would go with that. Okay, I said a lot about EC2, but you have to go back and do some studying on that because there are more questions that come up around the subject of EC2 in the CLF CO2 exam. Let's talk about Batch. So Batch is a fully managed batch computing service that plans, schedules, and runs your containerized batch machine learning, simulation, and analytic workloads. That's a mouthful, but what you really need to know here are some of the keywords. If you see any question that has something about large workloads um, broken down into smaller tasks, think batch. If you see something about containerized batch machine learning workloads, think batch. And the fact is, anytime you see batch, you should think it's not real time, it's always a scheduled use case. So that's when you want to go for AWS batch. Then we have Lightsail. Lightsail is a virtual private server. The best way to describe this is if a customer or a developer wants to spin up their own web application or website or something, and they want an easy solution. That's the key term here. Easy way to get started with hosting their applications on the cloud. So it's a fully managed platform. So these are things you're going to see. If you see a keyword like easy solution for hosting website, developers and students are the target audience, sometimes small businesses. And if you see virtual private server, that's how you know what we're dealing with here. So that's how you know to choose Lightsail. Elastic Beanstalk, the key thing to know about Beanstalk is that it's used for developing applications quickly. You don't want to do all the hard work. You just choose your environment, choose the language, and you want to just basically spin up all the resources automatically. That's what Elastic Beanstalk is going to do. So keywords are automatic deployment, deploy applications within minutes, and provisioning resources for your application. So that's what you want to think about. It's going to do all the provisioning for you, load balancing, auto scaling, help monitoring, everything is going to be done for you. You don't have to do all that by yourself. Then we have some other features that I'll talk quickly about. These are services that have more to do with location. So local zones, they are used for latency sensitive portions of your application. So your application is running, but you have parts of it that are latency sensitive. You want to get single digit millisecond latency to your end users. You want to have local zone. So some of the services will be closer to the end users, and the rest of the application can be a little farther. That's the use case of local zones. Then we have AWS Outposts. Think about this as extending the capacity and the capabilities of AWS to your on premises location. That's what the idea of Outpost is. So it's a fully managed service that extends AWS infrastructure. You're also extending the APIs and all the tools to any data center. And that's the benefit here. Now, what could be tempting here is to choose storage gateway or outpost. They're two different things, right? With outpost, you're thinking about bringing AWS to your on-premises location. So they're going to have racks and it's like kind of like a mini data center brought from the AWS uh, cloud to your own physical location. But with storage gateway, you have what you have there is a hybrid solution. We're going to get there and talk about that in the storage domain, but that's something to really understand so you don't get that mixed up. Now, wavelength is where you is a service that allows you to build applications that deliver single digit millisecond latencies to mobile devices and end users. So the keywords here would be mobile devices. When you hear mobile, think wavelength. When you hear single digit millisecond latency, and it has to do with mobile devices, wavelength is what you want to go for. All right. So pay attention to some of the distinctions here because this is so crucial. So let's try a question and see if we understand what we've done so far. So a developer who has no cloud experience wants to use AWS technology to easily, keyword, build a web application. The question now is, which AWS service should the developer use to start building this application? So now we have to ask the question. Look at the options carefully and be able to spot out the distractors. So the first thing we see here is Elastic Container Service. Of course, this is saying container. So we know this has to do with containers. Can it be used for building a web application? It can be, but that's not the use case here because they want to easily do this. They don't have any experience. So container, it's out of the question. AWS Lambda. Can AWS Lambda be used to host a web application? No, it's Lambda is ideal for um, running a code that is going to run for less than 15 minutes, and your web application is probably going to stay longer than that. So Lambda is out of it. Um, then we have Amazon Lightsail, and that is clearly the answer because the keyword is easily to build a web application. So you can even build on WordPress, Joomla. There's a good number of options with the Lightsail service. Then Amazon SageMaker. This is basically work. It works best for machine learning workloads. So the answer to this question is, in fact, Lightsail. Okay, so that's just how the questions will look. Okay, so let's move to containers. I hope you're following. I hope you're learning and taking some notes. These are very important to understand for the exam. So in containers, we're going to look at three services: Elastic Container Registry, Elastic Container Service, and Elastic Kubernetes Service. These are very, very important to understand. So the first one is the ECR, which is the Container Registry. Again, the name registry should give you the clue. So if you see any question that asks about a fully managed container registry where you have your container images stored or artifacts stored, then you should think ECR. And that's how you'd choose that option. ECS is the container service. It is a container orchestration service that delivers the easiest way to build, deploy, and manage containerized applications. Notice that it has to be a container. That's what makes this unique. And then ECS basically is fully managed. If you see anything that says container, anything that says clusters, and anything that does not communicate serverless, that's EC2. If you're thinking serverless, meaning you don't have to worry about the server behind the scenes, then think Fargate. Fargate is also a container service, but it's serverless, which we'll look at shortly. Then EKS is Elastic Kubernetes Service. The key word here is Kubernetes. So if you see Kubernetes, think EKS. There's no much thinking to do in this case, but they're all fully managed services. Okay. Serverless is the next domain we're going to look at. And under this domain, we have just two. Now, there are more services that are serverless, but because we're still talking compute, I'm just kind of sticking to this these services. Of course, there are many other services, but AWS Fargate and Lambda. So, what do we know about these two? Well, Lambda is basically a serverless compute service. It allows you to run your code without worrying about managing infrastructure or you know working on the compute resources yourself. You're not going to have to spin up an EC2 instance. You're not going to have to set up all of those things. All you have to do is bring your code, run it, and you are good to go. So when do you want to use Lambda? Use Lambda when it's less than 15 minutes that the code is going to run for. So any question that has someone wants to run a code for less than 15 minutes, they don't want to worry about the underlying infrastructure or spinning up a server. How can they do it? Well, Lambda. You also see this in cases where there's a question on loose coupling, which is one of the um, well architected framework design principles. You want to loosely couple. What that means is you don't want everything to be tied to one particular microservice. You want to make your whole application a combination of different microservices. So if one fails, you can still find a way to make it work. So that's loose coupling. And Lambda is great for that because it responds to events. So Lambda is great for event driven workloads. When we look at Fargate, the major difference is think it's still serverless, but think containers, right? Because Fargate will work with ECS and EKS. Think more than 15 minutes and think event driven workloads or message driven workloads. So just think about more than 15 minutes. You want to do a lot more work with your workloads. Think Fargate. Okay, so that's the what you need to know about ECS. Uh, I mean about the serverless. I beg your pardon. So let's look at a question real quick. A company wants to update its online data processing application by implementing container based services. So the keywords we're seeing here is container based services. How long is it running for? It says it runs for 4 hours at a time. So that we already know that if we're doing container based, we're thinking ECS, we're thinking Fargate. 4 hours makes us eliminate Lambda. Lambda is only for less than 15 minutes. The key sentence here is that the company does not want to provision or manage server instances. That is basically saying we want a serverless solution. And so that eliminates further Elastic Beanstalk. Um, and it also eliminates EC2. So we're left, ECS. So we're left with Fargate. So the answer here is Fargate because it's more than 15 minutes. It's a container based service and it is serverless. So these are things you have to know in answering these questions. All right. So the answer is Fargate. All right, let's talk about analytics. I hope you're pumped up because I'm excited. We're still going to see a whole lot more services. By the way, AWS has over 200 services. We can't learn every single one of them, but for the scope of the exam, based on the exam guide, there's a number of services that are in scope, and those are the ones we're looking at. The ones that are out of scope will not be asked in the exam. You can go ahead and learn about them, but for the scope of this exam, you don't have to. So in analytics, we're thinking about Athena, data exchange, EMR, Glue, Kinesis, which mostly has other features within Kinesis or Kinesis, depending on how you pronounce it. Managed streaming for Apache Kafka, which is shortened as MSK. Open Search Service, QuickSight, and Redshift. So when you think analytics, think all these. Now, Redshift is also, in a sense, like sometimes can qualify as a database service, but sometimes these things overlap. But here, you just really need to know a little bit more about Athena, just a little bit more, because I've seen it occur quite a number of times in the examination. But at the core of it, it's just a basic question. that you're going to be asked, and you have to understand. The key thing with Athena is that it's an interactive analytics service that uses SQL. So you're interacting with data in S3, which is a storage service using SQL. And Athena is serverless by its by its design. So you just, all you need to do is just analyze data straight away in S3 using um, SQL, which is structured query language. Okay, so keywords: SQL with S3, it's serverless queries, and you're querying data for analytics in S3 directly. So you can query logs, you can query a number of things, and that's what you want to look out for before you choose Athena as the correct answer. Okay, then we have some other services: data exchange, EMR, and Glue. For data exchange, the key word here is third party data exchange, right? You're exchanging data. And what kind of data? You're just talking about third party data. It could go across multiple kinds of data, but it's a service that allows you to do this within AWS. Okay, EMR, you want to think about, so EMR is short for map reduce, by the way. Elastic map reduce. And when you think map reduce, if you know anything in the data field, you're thinking big data. Very similar to Apache Spark, Apache Hive, Presto, some of these frameworks. But EMR is the AWS service that allows you to do data processing of very large data. So think petabyte scale analysis, and it's, I think, 17 times faster than the average Apache Spark. So that's just basically what you need to know. You don't need to go any deeper. Just know what the service is and what it can be used for. So think big data for EMR. For Glue, you're doing three things with Glue. You can discover, you prepare the data, and combine the data. So that's the Glue part of it, right? So you're basically doing something called ETL. Okay, so extract, transform, and load. And this is how you handle data. It's one of the things you do in data management or data analytics. Okay, so you analyze your data, and you can do this within minutes. That's the good thing here with Glue. So if you see any question that talks about combining data, preparing data, discovering data, or you see ETL, or you see just data put together for analytics, and it's done using a serverless service, think Glue. Okay, let's talk about AWS Kinesis. So basically, Kinesis has multiple facets to it, but at the core, it's to collect, process, and analyze real time video and data streams. So think kinesis, right? Kinetic energy. So we're talking about something that is moving and active. So it's collecting, processing, and analyzing real time data. All right. So in talking about kinesis, we're going to talk about three aspects of kinesis as a service here. So it's this video streams, which is core about video, streaming video. So you can think of all the applications. Think of like watching the Olympics or watching some kind of show that is giving you live information. Kinesis video streams will help you gather that the live video from from all these different viewing centers or locations to the AWS cloud, and use that to build some kind of video processing in real time. So that's the use case for Kinesis video streams. Kinesis data streams, instead of video as the data here, you're just talking data. So it could be more kinds of data for specialized needs. Okay, so that's what you want to use this for. But the key thing to note is streams. So you're streaming data from hundreds of thousands of sources, and it's coming in within seconds. That's the cool thing about Kinesis data streams. And then what is data firehose? Basically, the major difference here is it's handling large volumes of data. So it could be video, audio, and all of those, and it's giving real-time processing and analysis of this data. So you can see how they're all connected, but the key differences would be in the name. Think about what each one is doing, and that will give you the right answer when you choose. Of course, we should talk a little bit more about MSK, which is managed streaming for Apache Kafka. It's a streaming data service that manages Apache Kafka infrastructure. So all you need to think about for that one is still similar to the same thing we talked about before. Not much of a difference, but just the key thing is Apache Kafka. I haven't seen any question on this before, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, Open Search Service. This is a managed service that simplifies performing interactive log analytics. All right, it's used for real-time application monitoring, website search. So, like it's open search, so it's kind of used for. I think it's also very good for vector database when it comes to AI. But remember, it's a managed service, and the key thing is doing is simplifying the log analytics or website searches. So think about search when you think about search. That's what you want. Ignore these keywords. This is an error here. QuickSight. QuickSight is basically a business intelligence tool. So when you think Power BI, AWS version of Power BI is QuickSight. It's going to give you a dashboard and it's going to give you some visualizations of the analytics, and those are the keywords at the bottom there. So visualization, analytics, and dashboards in on any device, by the way. Then we have Redshift. Redshift is this should actually be in pale yellow. It comes up a lot. The key thing you want to think about with Redshift is data warehousing. We're talking about exabytes of data. So think about data stored in huge amounts in a warehouse. So that's the key word. When you see data warehouse, just think Redshift. Don't think too much. All right, that's the clue there. And it's fully managed as well. Okay, so let's try a question. A company needs a data warehouse. You just stop there, honestly. One more thing to know about Redshift is that just like Athena, it also uses SQL queries. So make sure you look out for data warehouse before you go with either Athena or Redshift. So in this case, a data warehouse must support SQL. We're talking about Redshift. Athena is just querying S3 using SQL language. That's all. Why are we not choosing EMR? That's Elastic MapReduce. We're not doing ETL loads here. And QuickSight, there's nothing here that talks about visualization or some kind of graphical insights from business intelligence. So our correct answer here is Redshift. Let's talk about storage. Hope you're still in with me and you are still enjoying this. We still have a number of services to go through, but remember, you might need to watch this again and again so that it gets stored up in your head. Just keep that in your mind. Okay, so let's talk about storage. So at the core of storage is S3, right? So one of the biggest services, one of the first services in AWS is S3. So you have to do a little bit more digging, just like EC2, to understand how S3 works. I'll still try to go through that here, just for the sake of those who don't want to go through that effort. But think S3 is going to be very deep. And then we have other services like backup, Elastic Block Store, Elastic File System, short for EFS. EBS is short for Elastic Block Store. And then we have Elastic Disaster Recovery, EFS, FSX, S3 Glacier, which is kind of just a feature in S3, but sometimes you see it separated this way. And then we have storage gateway. So let's get into it. So for S3, S3 is object storage. That's something to think about. So when you're thinking S3, think object storage. There are different kinds of storage: block storage, file system storage. But S3 is object storage, which means you just throw in data. It could take any kind of data and everything is flat. There's no hierarchy to the storage. Okay, so it's built to store and retrieve any amount of data from anywhere. So there's unlimited storage in S3. And it gives you durability, availability, performance, security, and basically it's very low cost, and that's what you want. So, what are some of the features of S3? Versioning. Versioning means you can have multiple versions of the same file stored in S3, and that gives you redundancy. That gives you some kind of deletion, protection mechanism. Accidental deletes can be catered to with that. Versioning also allows you to have multiple versions of the same file without overwriting the file. So that's what versioning is. Replication is, it gives you the ability to replicate data from one bucket in one specific region to another bucket in the same region or another region. And replication is very good for disaster recovery, redundancy as well, sometimes to bring lower latency delivery of content to people based on their location or their region. So that's what you would use replication for. Then we have lifecycle. Lifecycle basically is a way to manage your resources within the S3 bucket and give them a timeline. So some objects can move from one storage class to another, or you can set a specific time frame in which those objects will be permanently deleted from the bucket. That helps you with managing cost as well. Then we have transfer acceleration. This improves upload speeds to S3 based on distance. So if you have someone uploading to a bucket in US East 1 from Japan, that's really far. And so you use transfer acceleration, and that speeds up the process of uploading that file. We have access points. This just gives you a managed way of granting permissions to an S3 bucket using an access point endpoint. It's a different endpoint that you can grant. So you can use policies in that access point to allow different people access your bucket without using the exact bucket name itself. So it's an added security measure. It's also a good scalable option for sharing your data with the right people. Then we have storage lens. Storage lens is just a think analytics, all right, for S3. It's going to give you insight into your bucket. It's going to give you logs about, not really logs, more like metrics of your AWS S3 buckets, all the things you need to know about it. You can even go deep down to the prefix level, but just think about storage lens as lens for your storage, right? You can see what's happening with your S3 storage. Then there is something dulled out here. It's Macy, because it's not really a feature of S3, but it shows up in the exam so much that I said, let me just put it in here. Macy is used for managing um, PII. So PII is personally identifiable information. You don't want to have PII in your S3 bucket. So you can use this to detect PII present in the S3 bucket. It will deliver a report, and you can use that report to take the next step to remove or redact the PII in that S3 bucket. And then we have storage classes. So when we talk about storage classes, these are the different tiers of storage in S3. And with each tier comes a different cost. So as you go down in from S3 standard all the way to Glacier Deep Archive, the cost goes lower. It gets cheaper. But the cheap cost comes with some conditions, right? So if you're in standard, for example, you can retrieve objects immediately. You don't have to worry about it. Use this for frequently accessed data. Then we have intelligent tiering, which is an AI machine learning, monitoring storage class that checks access to your objects and then moves them to various tiers based on to different access tiers based on access. Okay, so it either keeps the object in standard if it's regularly accessed, or if it sees that an object has not been accessed for 30 days, it automatically moves it to an infrequent access tier to give the cost savings. That's intelligent tiering. Now, in standard IA is standard, right? Benefits of standard, just that you don't access the object regularly. So it's rarely accessed, maybe 30 days before you get to access it again. So, like a month, you want to put your objects in infrequent access. Only do this if you know that the access is once a month. If you don't know, go with intelligent tiering. If you don't have clear insight into the access patterns, stay with intelligent tiering. Okay. Then one zone IA, basically, this is the best for basically is infrequent access, but with the twist of using one availability zone to store your data. So it's going to be in one availability zone. What does that mean? It means that you don't have that added redundancy that comes with having at least three availability zones in a region. And so use this when you don't mind losing files, right? There's some use cases where your data can be recreated and it's not important that it's always available. You can go with that option. And think about it, it's still infrequent access. So that's when you use one zone IA. Then we have Glacier. Glacier is the next tier. There's instant retrieval, which is I want to store it for a long period of time, but when I want to get it back, I need it immediately. I want millisecond access. Go with Glacier instant retrieval. Now, Glacier flexible retrieval is retrieval from minutes to hours. You can't get it immediately. You'd have to restore the file. When the file is restored, then it takes a while to get it restored. So it's from few minutes, like 1 to 5 minutes in the if you're going with like an expedited retrieval, to up to like 12 hours if you're going with like bulk retrieval. And then you have Glacier Deep Archive, which is the cheapest of all of them. But what you get here in Glacier Deep Archive is the retrieval is the longest, but it's cheap, like I said, and it's basically from hours to hours, right? So 12 hours to like 24 hours to get the object retrieved back from the storage. Now, use Glacier when you are not in a hurry to get objects back, and you're gonna have some rare access, very rare, like within maybe twice or three times a year, or even up to like multiple years. So that's all you need to know about S3. There might be a few more things, but again, that's up to you to study. Let's move on to backup. So backup is a centralized backup solution in AWS. It's a fully managed service. It centralizes and automates data protection. So anytime there is something about data protection or backing up your data and you want a centralized solution, think backup. Think backup if you're thinking also about multiple accounts being backed up, different resources across multiple accounts backed up within an AWS organization, then you can use AWS backup for that as well. And then you store all the resources that you back up. They're all called protected resources, and they're stored in a vault. So snapshots, um, you know, i- different kinds of resources are stored in a vault. All right, let's move on and talk about EBS. EBS is Elastic Block Store. You use this with EC2. So they're attached. Basically, they're like the hard drive attached to your computer in the cloud. So that's what you should think about when you see EBS. I'm sorry. So EBS is block storage. It is the ideal storage for EC2 instances. When you see volume, think EBS. Now, EFS is a distributed file system. It provides you with serverless elastic file storage that allows you to share data across multiple EC2 instances, even EKS, ECS, and even Lambda functions can share the same storage. So think about shared storage. This is the network access storage offering of AWS, and that's EFS. Of course, it uses the protocol NFS. So if you see anything about NFS and it's talking about a distributed file system that is unlimited in size, that is highly performant, go with EFS. And it's scalable, so it can keep increasing. You're not going to run out, but it's expensive. So have that at the back of your mind. It's expensive to use. Elastic disaster recovery. It doesn't show up so many times in the exam, but just think about up to date copy as the keyword. So if you see an up to date copy of your source servers, you can use this to bring back your servers. Basically, it's great for disaster recovery, as the name implies. Then we have FSX, which has different types, different flavors. There's FSX for Windows file system, and there's FSX for Lustre. Windows file system, of course, is for Windows, and it's SMB, right? So SMB, that's a server message block. I think that's the the full meaning of that word, but SMB is the protocol for Windows, while NFS is the protocol for Linux, and Linux is FSX for Lustre. Okay, so just know that because some questions may come asking which would you use if it's SMB. Just go Windows. If you see NFS, think Linux. FSX is highly performant. That's really what you want to go with because it's basically in a sense working like EFS. The major differences would be what I just shared, where you have Windows option and you have the Linux option. You don't really have that with the EFS. Glacier specifically is what I've described before, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But when you see Glacier, choose Glacier when you're talking archival data, lowest cost, and rarely accessed. That's what you want. Um, Storage gateway is a hybrid. It's a hybrid cloud storage service. Okay, hybrid cloud storage service. What does that mean? It gives you on-premises access to cloud storage. So you're on your own on-premises location, but you have access to cloud storage because they're interconnected. And how do you connect your on-premises to the cloud? You're using protocols like iSCSI, that is used for volumes, SMB, like we said before, which is for Windows. If you have like Windows administration in your on-premises location, then you can use that. There's NFS as well, and this allows you to use your AWS storage without having to rewrite your existing application. So it's really beautiful. It gives you a hybrid solution. And there's the file gateway, there's volume gateway, and there's tape gateway. So I mean, gateway is the key word, right? It's a connection, a channel between your on-premises to the cloud. So think hybrid storage, think storage gateway. And then we have application integration. This has to do with how do I connect my application to other aspects of my application, or how do I connect one AWS service to another AWS service? Well, you can integrate them using these particular services. We have Event Bridge, we have SNS, which is Simple Notification Service, we have Simple Queue Service, and we have Step Functions. So let's talk about these real quick. So Event Bridge is a service that provides real-time access to changes in data in AWS service. Okay, so it connects one part of your application to another part. So you basically will choose an event source on Event Bridge, and then you would choose a target. So this is the source. Based on this action, Event Bridge will take a specific action or take a specific message and deliver it to a target. That target could be a Lambda function, it could be an SNS topic, it could be Kinesis data, it could be many services that it supports. So when you think Event Bridge, keywords to look out for will be Event Bus, real-time event notification. Vault is also mentioned, but it's just there are many features with Event Bridge. And then we have SNS, SQS, step functions. These are the active parts really. So with SNS, you're thinking about a web service that makes it easy to set up, operate, and send notifications from the cloud. So there is some event, and that event publishes a message from a specific application, and that is immediately delivered to a subscriber. So there has to be a subscriber or a topic that responds to that notification. So when you think SNS, think push-based notifications, right? It's kind of like what you get on your phone where you register for something and then you see a push-based notification. That's kind of like how SNS works. It's publish, it fans out multiple messages in case you want to connect one SNS topic to multiple. You can use the fan out feature, and there must be subscribers. So publisher subscriber model. SQS, on the other hand, is a queuing service. So it takes messages and queues them, and it allows for protection. You don't lose your messages, right? That's the benefit of SQS. So it's used by distributed applications. You want to exchange messages. And because it's using a polling model as against a push model, you will always have a way to secure that message. So if you're thinking about resiliency, use SQS over SNS. If you're looking for a polling service rather than a publishing or pushing service, think SQS. All right, it's a queue. That's what the queue stands for, and it's great for decoupling or loosely coupled applications. Step functions. All right, think about this when you're thinking about a workflow service that is kind of like a chart that shows you how different parts interact with other parts. So it's a step function. This leads to this, and it helps you orchestrate microservices and different pipelines. So think with step functions, think pipelines, think microservices, also think loose coupling. That's how you would go with step functions. So here's a question: a company needs to use Amazon S3 to store audio files that are each 5 megabytes in size. The company will rarely access the files, but the company must be able to retrieve the files immediately. Which S3 storage class will meet these requirements most cost effectively? One thing I wanted to mention is you have to read the question carefully. If it says cost effectively, you want to go with the cheapest, but you want to also factor in the condition. Here, the condition is the size of the file. That's fine. You can store a 5 megabyte file in S3. That's not a problem. Now it says the company will rarely access the files. So your mind is probably already going to Glacier, right? But here's the challenge. It says they would need to retrieve it immediately. They don't want to wait. So if we look at the options, we do not see Glacier instant retrieval. If we had instant retrieval, that would be the correct answer and it would be the cheapest because we would get it back in milliseconds. But the challenge here is they want it immediately, and we don't have that option. So we have to look at the A and B. Standard is okay, but it's not the cheapest here. Standard infrequent access takes care of the rarely accessed portion of this message of this question. So I'll go with B. So the correct answer to this would be B. Okay. Let's try another question. More about notifications here. Which AWS service is a fully managed publisher subscriber messaging service that enables you to decouple microservices, distributed systems, and serverless applications? This is a straightforward answer, and I'm hoping that you're saying right now, wherever you are, because it says publisher subscriber model, you are thinking SNS. If it says polling, we would think SQS. If it said something else like nothing here, right? If it was, for example, Event Bridge will more likely align with things where we're combining multiple parts. Which I mean, Event Bridge could work here, but Event Bridge is not necessarily a publisher subscriber messaging service. So the correct answer here would be SNS. Okay, now let's just look at the last part before we stop this part one. I'm going to have a part two so that we can delve into them. And I hope you get to listen to all of them, watch all of them so that you get prepared for the exam. So, business applications, these are some of those worthy mentions. They're not so huge on the exam, but they could show up as distractors. So you definitely want to know what they are. So there's Amazon Connect and Amazon Simple Email Service. Now, Amazon Connect does not mean how you connect with Amazon. It's just a service that is a call center in the cloud, right? It's a contact center service that allows businesses to manage customer interaction without on premises infrastructure. So it's giving you basically like voice and chat support channels, and you just have to modify this to fit into your organization, but you don't have to do all the on premises infrastructure that manages this. So think about it as a call center in the AWS cloud. That's how you should remember this. Now, SES is AWS's email service. All right. So SMTP and all of that stuff. If that's something along your alley, that's our own our own cloud-based email sending service, and it allows businesses to send transactional marketing or even bulk emails at scale. So this is kind of doing what a what's that platform? I'm trying to remember the name. I think it's MailChimp. Yeah, it's kind of like doing what MailChimp would do. So it's good for bulk emails and email sending. Now it's different from SNS. Now with SNS, you can send notifications to any subscriber. The subscriber can be a telephone number, it could be an email, right? But that's different from SES. SES is for email sending, while SNS might be able to send an email if you configure it to. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of this session now. This is part one. Please stay tuned as we look into part two as well. So thank you for watching. See you very soon.